This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACOM, the National Association for Court Management. Last month, we talked about some of the 2024 workplace trends named in the Gartner Group's report. This month, let's take a look at another predictor of workplace trends. Forbes Magazine released its article titled, "The 10 Biggest Business Trends Everyone Must Be Ready For Now." It lists, starting in second place, the demand for interpersonal skills, the move to sustainable business and business resilience, personalization of the customer experience at scale, which will create a customer experience revolution, the data economy, the search for skill solutions rather than hiring on the basis of degrees and certificates, employees demanding remote work opportunities, the shift for diversity and inclusivity. And what is the number one trend? Generative artificial intelligence will be everywhere. Many court administrators appear to see artificial intelligence as an IT issue. When I asked about it, I was frequently referred to the IT department. However, I think AI is definitely a consumer-based concept by now. Recently, the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz announced its top 100 consumer AI apps. The most popular one by far? ChatGPT, trailed by other tools including Microsoft Copilot, Google's Gemini and Bing, Character AI, Perplexity, Claude, and even Grammarly. Now, these tools can create compelling text in a matter of seconds. It can significantly shorten the job of developing reports, briefs, presentations, and many emails. I've used AI tools myself. In fact, today's thumbnail image was developed by ChatGPT. There has also been considerable discussion about the problems with these tools. Hallucinations, lack of transparency, appropriating personal and confidential information, and bias, just to name a few. To frame this discussion, let's pose a hypothetical situation. You're the court administrator or the clerk of court of a large metropolitan trial court, and it's time to develop the annual report. You're always looking for ways to make this document a more compelling, readable, and persuasive story to your funding body and to the public. You assign several staff members to write various portions. You assign your deputy to assemble it into a coherent narrative of your court's success. Shockingly, a draft appears on your desk in record time, and you wonder if your staff has used artificial intelligence to help develop it. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we're going to take a look at the court's position on using AI tools. Is it occurring? Are courts aware of these tools? Do we think that staff might be using them with or even without the knowledge of upper management? And are courts even concerned about them? Here to discuss these questions are Roger Rand, Information Technology Manager for the Multnomah County Circuit Court in Portland, Oregon; TJ Mament, District Court Administrator for the 10th Judicial Administrative District in Athens, Georgia; Lori Tyak, Clerk of Court for the Franklin County Municipal Court in Columbus, Ohio; and Dana Bartocci, Human Resources and Development Director for the Minnesota Judicial Branch. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. Have you ever used ChatGPT or any other AI tool? Do you know if any of your staff uses them? If your staff does use them, do you want to know? And what would you do if they admitted to it? TJ?
Well, I will confess that I have used ChatGPT on a few different things. Couple of examples: I was updating a position description for a role in the court, and I asked it to give me some examples of what would be some of the knowledge, skills, and abilities in this position. And not surprisingly, it went out there and pulled some things from NACOM, pulled some examples from other positions, and it was largely accurate. I will say I absolutely could have written it myself, would have taken a few more minutes, but knowing that what was in it I was not surprised. It did not hallucinate. It was fairly accurate, and it was a really good start. I had another time to use it to create a data use policy with one of our state councils. We have one of our state councils that works with accountability court data and everything, and we were trying to come up with a data use policy for the public on if you want to make a request to download a chunk of data. And I'd volunteer to say, look, we need to have a piece that's going to deal with academic use and talking about use of an institutional review board because of the type of data that folks may be requesting. Pete, I did want to go back and answer the second part of your question on whether or not I would be surprised or excited to see if my staff use ChatGPT or other AI to get that report to me sooner. First, I will say I would be excited that they got the report done in record time, but I would be a bit concerned about the use of AI. I would be fine asking the question as to whether or not AI was used, but for me, it comes down to an issue of transparency. Does it have the voice that we want that report to be, how we want it to sound? Does it reflect what we do in the courts and how we explain what we do? If we can, and it does, I would not be opposed to using it. And then my second part, and I'll probably talk on this later, is whether or not we exposed any data that was crucial to the integrity of the court in generating some of the stats or other information that may go into that report. I'm sure we'll touch on that as well later.
Lori?
I would definitely like to know from the staff if they used AI to generate parts of or all of the annual report, because to me, an annual report represents the history of that particular year that we're capturing in that annual report. And I might ask the individual who submitted it to me what their source of information was. How did they gather this information? Was it through our database? What information did they pull? Was it a single source of truth? I'd also like to know if they can trace that information back to the original context of what I asked them to do. I think part of what you touched on, TJ, was having personal knowledge. And I think that makes a big difference. If these individuals are submitting parts of an annual report with using AI, as long as they can confirm the information provided through their own knowledge base, I think that makes it reasonably effective as far as creating that data.
I think that's a great point. If I was asking AI to write me a narrative on quantum physics, I would have no way to fact check and reality check that based on my own knowledge. But within the court stuff, and specifically with my own court and my own court data, I think I'd be able to reality check that pretty well.
Dana?
I think I might even flip this question on the head. If I got a report back that they didn't use ChatGPT, I might be asking, hey, did you use ChatGPT? This is public data. This is meant to go out. It can help create one voice. Are you using anything that can help with that? I use ChatGPT almost daily. Instead of, my staff hiding it from me, they're almost like, hey, Dana, you know what? I use ChatGPT for that first draft. And they're doing that because they are looking at how to be more efficient. We have policies, we have ethics policies for internet tools. This is another internet tool. And I'm supporting my staff in exploring it within guardrails, ethical use, all of those things, and wanting them to figure out how to use this tool to help make us more efficient to do some of those things. So I might be asking my staff member, hey, either high five, did you use ChatGPT? Then some of those questions too, hey, do you make sure all of this is accurate, blah, 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 all within the rules. But I'm looking at it as teaching my staff and teams what are the responsibilities of ethical AI use, so that it's not a secret that we're talking about it for that transparency, for that reason. And then when something comes up, we all share with each other, oh, I, drafted that thing. I just sent an email to somebody the other day saying thank you and ChatGPT for that very well worded email you sent me. And I was joking because I knew his voice so well that I knew he didn't write it. It was to me and some other people, but it was a very neutrally toned email where I knew he was probably seething in the background. So, good use of ChatGPT to tone down an angry email. on something with public information that can be used in that way. I've used ChatGPT in many ways, from policy writing to reviewing to presentation drafting, notes, all sorts of things that it can help me. But to all of your point, I have to know the content and the content well, and also know how to prompt ChatGPT. And that's something that I've been working with over the last year on getting my prompts better to get what I need.
Roger?
I use a lot of the AI tools. I bounce around between them. The Oregon Judicial Department is moving in the direction of Copilot as the AI document assistant, and we don't have those licenses yet. I actually we'll get to that a little bit later in one of the later part of this discussion, but I use it to put together presentations. If I have a question or I need to learn more about a subject before I present on it, I can work with these tools to help clarify the content and make sure that I understand it better. I think it's a great tool for that. As far as our employees using it, I think that, number one, have a data governance plan, in place, and have rules and policies in place so that employees know what the boundaries are. And of course, we can't have people putting in confidential case information into the cloud. But I think it's fair game, and I think that it's not even a question that people are already using it to write better, to sound more intelligent, to sound more well-versed. And, in any case, I would just make sure that people knew to double check what was being told.
A huge concern right now is the issue of hallucinations, where an AI tool makes up information or advice. Are you worried about hallucinations? And how would you guard against them in your annual report? Roger?
So it's important to understand why AI systems hallucinate. So just to touch on that first, before I go into the report, generative AI systems operate based on the data that's available to them and on pattern recognition. So the systems rely on user prompts and questions being input by the user. So it's not really magic, it's a computer program. Now, I'm not a programmer and I'm not an AI expert. I am an IT manager that work with data analysts and with data integrators and programmers and technicians who may use AI. And it is within the scope of my job to have a very broad and high-level understanding of the system, much like all of you. We have to have this sort of greater knowledge of AI, not necessarily details on how it works. We don't put confidential information into the annual report. Actually, our report is a biannual report because we work on a biennium. And so because they're publicly available documents, we're not going to be doing that. It's purely coincidental that we're actually doing this right now. So you asked this question, and we are actively putting together our 23-24 annual report. The trial court administrator put one of our managers and his management assistant in charge of gathering the data to present it in the document and visualizing that data with pictures, graphs, and charts within the report. So to guard against hallucinations, I would make sure that I would verify the source of the data and that the raw data was queried accurately and it was reflected in the charts and graphs being used. If I felt the graphs and the charts in the report misrepresented the data, I would tell whoever put it together to revise it. So that would be my suggestion.
Dana?
Sure. Hallucinations, when you are providing the data that it's looking at are not as much of a concern. So in the way you set it up, if we're putting things in different voices in there and we know it's public data and it comes back to us, the hallucinations aren't as big of a concern because you've provided the data. I'm more concerned when somebody says, tell me about something, and then it's giving me an answer. And that's where it's trust but verify. Look at it, understand it. And if it's like, oh, that's interesting, before you use that as your go-to thing, you do need to look for a corroborating source or ask for a source, those kind of things. So when you're using it for background information on a topic, you've got to look at that. But there's also a lot of closed AI things that don't hallucinate, whether it's a paid for product that only has a certain data set, if we're looking at court cases, et cetera. It's It's not garbage in, garbage out, because you've purchased a product that only has a certain data set, so it's not going to hallucinate. But when you're using the large language models like ChatGPT in a free-for-all, then you've got to know when to look for those hallucinations and when they're really not going to be a problem.
Let's take a look at a few other possible uses. AI tools have made huge advances in language translation. One very good app is called DeepL Translate. You discover that on very busy days when all your interpreters are in court, a clerk at the counter is using DeepL Translate to assist non-English speaking customers. You're torn because without this help, you would either have to send customers away or rely on Language Line, which is very expensive. Would you condone the use of an app like DeepL Translate as long as it's only used at the counter? TJ?
So thanks, Peter. It's an interesting question. I think this is one where, for most of us, our state and local rules around the use of translation and interpreters has not caught up to the times. You know, there are federal guidelines, especially from the Department of Justice, on the use of interpretation, and they have interpreted that loosely to say that interpreters need to be made available throughout the entire court process, which includes transactions potentially at the counter. Now, even the feds have sort of argued the level of risk is sort of the determining factor about how much effort the court needs to go to provide access to an interpreter. And for example, if I was in court in a criminal case and I had jail as a potential sanction, having access to an interpreter really, really important. If you go back all the way to the clerk level and somebody's coming in just to ask how they make a payment on a case and the risk to the individual is minimal, the feds and others say, well, that might be where you could have relied on some alternative option. In many cases, it's the child or the friend who comes in with the non-English speaker, or the one person in your office who speaks a little bit of that language, or a lot of hand motions and pointing and things and using rough translations of English to get to the result. I think the reality is we've all been using things like Google Translate for probably a decade, you know, typing something quickly in and showing it on our phone to say, are you looking to make a payment? I think so. In that case, using a AI translation tool such as this for what would be a transactional purpose at a counter, I wouldn't necessarily see that as a bad thing. That said, if I was going to talk about rulemaking and whatnot, I would want to make that as transparent as possible and potentially even have a sign that says, you know, for minor level translation services, we use this particular app or this particular service to assist our clerks in assisting the public. In that which case, then you're putting it right out there in the public and you go with what you got.
Lori?
I agree with a lot of what TJ said, but a lot of what all four of us have talked about is having rules and policies set in place. And I think that's especially important if we're going to use an AI translator of any sort. I think also one of the things we should consider working at the counter, what questions are the top 10 questions that are asked? And we shouldn't allow anyone to be able to ask questions of the people across the counter outside those parameters. If they want an attorney, if they want, somebody to help them, we do the best we can. Oftentimes, translators are not available for the clerk's office. And we're open 24/7, which means if someone comes in and their loved one has been arrested, they don't understand what it's going to take to get them out of the jail. We have documents, not all of which are in other languages, explaining who's responsible if the defendant doesn't show up for court, if they're bonded out, also the percentage of bond. There's a lot of bond information. That's a lot of legal terminology that really needs to be explained. And we do pretty well in English, but I can't say that every language out there has words that we can translate from English to their language. It's amazing sometimes to learn that there is no word in English for a word in Egyptian, for instance. I have an Egyptian director and he'll tell me there is no word, but it's like this word. So if people are hearing or seeing words that are like other words, but they're not accurate, what information are they really taking away from that counter? What kind of interaction, what kind of information are they able to understand? Again, I think that it depends on whether we're using slang, whether that individual uses slang, syntax, dialects, and individualized definitions that come from family or communities. Sometimes they have specific words they use that are, again, slang words that may not be able to be translated from one language to ours. And that makes it a little bit more difficult. I am in favor of using some kind of AI translator just because we need all the help we can get at that counter. The number of languages that are spoken here in Columbus, Ohio are just enormous. And it's not always easy to find a translator, especially on the spot or in the middle of the night if that individual is coming to pay a bond for someone. So there are a lot of considerations for having that ability at the counter. But I do think it would be beneficial.
I think it's an internal assessment of whatever the risk of harm is, of the risk of harm of giving bad information or badly interpreted or badly translated information. So as kind of Lori mentioned, the word bond has a legal meaning here, but bond in other languages maybe refer to, holding somebody, or chaining them or something like that. It could have some cultural consistencies, not the least of which is down here in the South. If somebody said something like bless their little heart, that could get translated as you put a hex on somebody, So I think, whatever we need to do, we need to be intentional. And I think if we're having staff use some of these tools, I think we also have to train ourselves of saying, speak slowly, speak very consistently and thoughtfully so that the app is picking up and can translate that, and try to not use some of those slang and stuff like that that we casually will fall into when we're speaking in English.
Another potential use, one that Roger has mentioned, is that meeting attendees could possibly start connecting to meetings remotely and have an AI app take notes and summarize the meeting. Now, this type of function could increase an individual's productivity. It could also be incredibly insulting to the meeting organizer. On the other hand, I've attended meetings where the executive authority, say the presiding judge, sent an assistant to the court administrator. That person represented the court, but could not render an opinion or cast a vote on any issue of import. Now, personally, would you bar surrogate apps from meetings? And aren't these two situations functionally the same, except for the fact that one uses technology? Roger?
Great question. First of all, I do want to put a plug in for the National Association for Court Management AI Guide. So that is called Courting AI and is available on the NACM website. Within that guide, they talk about this. They actually talk about these types of summary apps. And I think that one of the things that they mention in the guide that I think is important to start off this conversation is making sure that you have the permission of all the attendees to use the summarizing app. And coincidentally, just like the question you asked me before, where we're currently doing the annual report, I just had a request come in from a judge for one of these apps. So 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the deputy trial court administrator and saying that there was a public meeting about civil commitment hearings. And someone had started using one of these bots, and the meeting wasn't discussing anything specific about a specific civil commitment, which would have been confidential. However, it raised a concern with him that somebody was using the summary bot and nobody was calling them on it. So that sort of raised this question. And I also mentioned to him, I said, we have this guide. Have you downloaded the AI guide that actually talked about this? Because it's the court's responsibility to recognize who's in a meeting, right? So if you are leading a meeting and you're watching the participants, you're going to notice when one of these bots joins, because they're typically called something like Read AI, bot reader. They could be any sort of obvious name. They're not going to be generally a person's name. And it's our responsibility to sort of call out, hey, I recognize that somebody just put some bot in the chat, or, can you tell me why you're doing it? And then if somebody says, yes, I did it, then the host or the chair of the meeting or the judge, if it's a hearing, can then say, okay, I'll go ahead and authorize that. Does anyone object? And sort of have a consensus. If somebody does object, or if it's a hearing and the judge doesn't want that bot running, the clerk can just expel the person out of the hearing, or in the meeting, anybody who's the host of a meeting can just expel a participant. You have to be a host, but you can do that. A judge who turned in this ticket last week came and said, I really liked the summarizing report. I went to this meeting, there were a bunch of judges there, it was complicated material, and at the end, we all got this great report that summarized everything that happened in the meeting, and it was really valuable. I want that tool. So that tool in our world, because they asked for the tool to be used in Teams, and that would be Copilot's AI read. So I now will turn in a ticket to our state court administrator's office saying that this judge has a formal request to have a Copilot license. That Copilot license allows that person to be able to activate that AI read application within any meeting. So they don't have to be the host, they don't have to have started the meeting or sent out the invite. As soon as you have that license attached to your username, you can actually start that bot in any meeting or hearing that you attend. And I think that's sort of, again, an important thing for judges to understand, for people who host meetings to understand, that anybody who has one of these licenses can just start it.
Dana?
Sure. I think some of these are already out there, and I'm going to talk about not things in court hearings. I know that there's lots of rules about can you record court and how this works. And right now in Minnesota, we do not allow bots in our court hearings. So just as Roger mentioned, you have to be aware. In a lot of our meetings, we're having these discussions. We have staff hours devoted to taking minutes at some meetings. We have that situation going on. And how can AI be a tool to help alleviate that? Or if someone's running a meeting, they can't take minutes at the same time. And my memory is not great sometimes if I'm leading a meeting. So how can it really assist us? So we're looking at putting out some of those guardrails of when would this be appropriate? When is it a good tool to use? And I agree with getting permission from everyone on there. And just like that judge became a fan, once you get a summary of something, you can see that it can be a very helpful situation. But then we look at all of our other policies and procedures and how does it relate to AI? So if it's a confidential meeting, we don't have an external bot recording it. So there's a lot of things that we probably already have in our system. And your question, Peter, was, isn't it just the same as having someone sub in and listen to the meeting? Well, it could be. Depends on the app and the privacy regulations of all the apps that are out there. And do we know where this information is going? Is it going to train their AI bots? There's so many other things that we have to be aware of rather than a human. However, probably would recall the meeting better than the proxy that attended the meeting. And so it might be a great use for things like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I want to come back one more comment too. One of the oddities about these summarizing tools, if you read the reports, it also, some of them tell you who has and has not paid attention during the meeting. So I think that when some people, particularly judges or people who are in leadership positions, we all have a lot going on. And, sometimes you're in meetings and you have pop-up messages hitting you. You have people walking in your door, flagging you down while you're on mute, telling you something. And it may not be that you're paying attention every moment in that meeting. And to have a report sort of memorialize that is a little bit concerning as well. So I don't know if that can be shut off or not, that particular part of the AI, but it would be something everyone should be aware of. It's going to be in the report.
You mentioned this obviously in the context of a court hearing, doing a summary of a legal proceeding has some concerns. Does that become a transcript? But setting that aside and using it in the normal business of what we do, so many of us are, on local or state committees or commissions or boards or whatever. And all of those things, we generate minutes. And right now, that's the work of somebody who, to Roger's point, is paying attention and is making notes of the important things of what happened in the meeting. But, if we can use an AI tool that can do a first cut of that, that's saving a lot of staff time. Now, of course, hopefully they're going back and reviewing that and making sure that it captured things correctly. But, if that saves them from having to go back and re-listen to an hour-and-a-half meeting 3 times to get all the notes in there, and can take that process down, I mean, I think that's real staff productivity savings.
A somewhat new concern is that arguments that AI tools make might become more persuasive than even humans. With the ability to review hundreds or thousands of persuasive arguments, it will be possible to come up with the most convincing one for your funding body. For example, a manager in a local drug court might know 1 or 2 inspiring success stories. On the other hand, ChatGPT might have access to thousands of compelling accounts of participants climbing out of despair with the help of drug court. It's just that none of these stories came from your drug court. Is that a concern? And would you do anything about it? Lori?
I think, yes, I would do something about it. I think I would reach out to some people that I knew are holding drug courts. I think that you have to be aware of bias. I mean, those drug courts want to prove that they're successful, and many of them may have a little bit of bias in their storytelling to show how far this person has come, whether it's truth or not. And I think we have to be careful. You need to do your due diligence. Make phone calls, do some more research online, establish something that you'll have proof when you go to your funding authority. They like stories, but they also like statistics and numbers. Show us the money, show us the savings, show us the benefit in a way that's measurable. So I think checking facts is one of the most important things that we can do, and to be aware of biases.
Roger?
So, attorneys can already use Westlaw and Lexis to find site references for their briefs using AI, and they do on a regular basis. The issue here, as Lori mentioned, is the data and the facts in addition to those case citations. Participants in hearings need to be held accountable for the data that they're using. And if a participant uses AI to find a compelling story to use in an argument, they should be held responsible to verify that that story is real and not a hallucination.
And what advice do you have for court administrators facing the allure of using AI apps such as ChatGPT? Lori?
I think the bottom line, I love what everyone has shared today, and it's all relevant to that last question. But I think we all need to remember anything and everything that we enter into ChatGPT will always be on the internet and available to anybody, whether it's truth or fiction. And we need to be careful when we're using AI to make sure that we're not sharing information that we don't want to get out there.
Roger?
I think that, starting the discussion now is important, and as we talked about earlier, having policies and rules in place surrounding the use of AI in our courts for business process, and of course for use of AI in the courtroom. And I think that one of your questions at the very beginning is, are you using AI? Does your staff use AI? Do you know? Do you care? That prompted me to write a survey. So I actually used Copilot to help me write a relevant survey to query staff to find out, are they using a generative AI system? Which one are they using? Why are they using it? How does it work to improve their job? And then, through a bit of refinement and working with Copilot over and over again to sort of make sure that it's, I think, was producing the right responses or querying for the right responses from our staff. Also asking in the end, how would you see generative AI working to help the court? Asking these questions of our staff. And that's another good starting place. Let's find out what people are using it for, what they think it's going to help our court for. And, after we get a policy in place, then use it for those things that will make us most productive and more efficient.
Dana?
Roger, I want a copy of that survey. So see what we can do. I even think just sending it to folks in HR and what are they doing it to help with HR processes. So my advice is go play with ChatGPT, with public information, your own information. Have it write a ode to your puppy, have it, write a first day of school poem for your child, have it summarize a topic that you've always wanted to learn about but haven't, just have it do something so that you aren't left behind. The folks that we think about when email came out, oh no, I just always print my email, or the web, ooh, don't use that horrible web thing. And eventually folks have to catch up. And this is one that's moving way faster than email usage or, the development and usage of the internet. And if you don't start understanding what it is, it's going to be done to you rather than with you, and about what we need to keep those guardrails in place. So understand it, start learning, start playing, seeing what it is within those ethical responsibilities we all have.
TJ?
So I kind of like the adage of, do unto yourself before you're done unto. And I think this is sort of where AI comes into play. To Dana's point, go out there and try it, play around with it. But I think to Lori's point as well, be careful about what you're exposing in what you're asking. If you've got a closed system and you are able to play with your own data, go have fun. If you're using an open source system, know that what you're putting out there potentially is going to go back in and feed the overall machine. So kind of my closing point is being transparent, both in your own use and asking and encouraging and motivating your staff to use tools, but be transparent in return. And kind of lastly, and most importantly, you get what you pay for. Like with any technology, the free things that come out there come at a cost. And that's the cost of your own, freedom of transparency of your own data. So, if like Roger, they're investing and using a particular tool, that may allow them to do some things that are closed within their own environment, so that those questions don't go out and back into the internet. But if you're using a free system and you're using it for personal use, great. But if you're using it and potentially exposing, court data or hearing information or whatnot, we need to be really mindful about setting some guide rails around that.
I want to thank TJ Bement, Lori Tyack, Roger Rand, and Dana Bertocci for their insights and perceptions of AI's effect in the workplace. We all agree that AI is here, but how it will incorporate itself into our court operations is still yet to be realized. Stay tuned. As always, my thanks to you court professionals tuning into today's episode. With AI, whether you're just becoming familiar with it, corralling it, or mastering its use in the workplace, you're doing it as the consummate professionals that you are. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, November 19th for another episode dealing with the issues facing our courts. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to click the subscribe button. Your support will help get information about court administration out to an even wider audience. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast series on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is podcasts@nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.